This is Alabama Politics with Steve Flowers, an in-depth interview with Alabama's top political newsmakers. Now, from the studios of Troy University, here is Steve Flowers.
I'm Steve Flowers, and welcome to Alabama Politics. Folks, we got a treat for you tonight, a real feature. We don't have some, what I want to say, sorry politician with you. We've got one of the greatest gentlemen in the state of Alabama history, one of the most legendary Methodist ministers in Alabama history. Those of you in Montgomery know him well. Dr. John Ed Mathison, who is a friend to a lot of people in Montgomery and throughout the state. He has had a legendary career as one of Alabama's most pronounced and profound Methodist ministers, and we're going to sit around and just talk about his career as a Methodist minister and how much he's done in Montgomery and different things like that. But we want to tell you, you're not going to put up with a politician now. We got one of the finest gentlemen I know, Dr. John Ed Mathison.
I thought you, hearing that introduction, I thought you had somebody else on. I was looking around here to be sure I was the right person here.
And he's no stranger to television. He no telling how many television sermons he's done over the years. Let's start with that, Dr. Mathison, if you don't mind.
Just John Ed. I feel much more comfortable.
Well, that's what I call you. I was going to try to be formal on the air a little bit. Once I've said doctor one time, we'll move on to John Ed. John Ed, tell our viewers how many years you were at Fraser United Methodist Church on the Atlanta Highway, which became one of the largest Methodist churches in the country under your tutelage. And how many sermons or TV shows, and how big was it in the prime of your years at Fraser Memorial Methodist Church? We'll start with that if you don't mind. Okay. It's some astounding number of, you had 3 services a day, and how many were televised and that sort of thing. Don't be too modest about it, but because it really is almost record-breaking how many times you were on television.
Right. Well, one reason our folks wanted the TV, they knew you had to be through on time because TV goes off, so
That's right.
You didn't have to worry about going real long. So we were on the radio and television, and we went first on TV here in Montgomery. And
was it on Channel 12?
Well, it started out on Channel 32, and we would have the service at 9:30, and it came on at 11. Had a guy on a motorcycle right outside the door that, as soon as it was taped there at Fraser, he'd jump on the motorcycle and run over to Channel 32, and
so that was it was kind of arcade back then. It wasn't like a live thing.
In fact, a lot of people didn't realize that they had TV when I was growing up.
That's right.
But I'm not quite that old. But we did that, and then we went to WSFA, and then cable TV came in, and the ACTS Network, which is a Southern Baptist network, I had somebody ask me, said, would you mind going to a meeting and helping get the ACTS Network here in Montgomery, because any station, any cable company could carry it. So I went there, and they said, well, what about you being on there? I said, I'm not a Baptist. They didn't have anybody that was a non-Baptist. And I was the first non-Baptist.
What year was this about? What ballpark?
Thank you, but I'd say back in the late 80s.
So television ministry was that was one of the first ones, especially in Montgomery, wasn't it?
Right, and yes, and also my dad always said, as soon as you get to a town, find a good radio and TV and get on it. And there was no Methodist presence on television nationwide. So we went on the ACTS Network, which was all over the United States. And every place you had a Baptist church, the ACTS Network was shown. What's interesting, and we were the only non-Baptist. Nobody knew we weren't Baptist. I mean, I'd get letters to Fraser Baptist Church. I mean, people didn't know it. But that really opened a lot of doors for us through that. And then there was another INSP asked us, you be on this, which also went all over the country. And just real interesting, you never know how God works. There was a guy watching the worship service in New York City, and he called us and he said, hey, I've got a connection in Russia. And if you don't mind, we won't charge you anything. I'd be glad if you would let us take your sermon, translate it into Russian, and show it on Russian television. I said, wow. He said, now look, he said, it'll be in St. Petersburg. And there are only 2 stations. and you'll be on one of them on Sunday morning, and it's always cold in Russia, so folks stay home and they watch TV. So we had an opportunity to go into St. Petersburg in Russia, and then a guy from Washington called one day and he said, you know,
D.C. or state?
D.C., Washington, and he said, you know, I've got an inroad with one of the big channels in Europe, and people there like to learn to speak English, and if you'd let us, we'd be glad to run your television, your worship service in about all the countries of Europe, and it would be in English, and people would hear English. Now, so I want you to get this picture. Folks in Europe were learning how to speak English from a Southern boy like me, so I bet they had. So I said, hey, we'd be glad to do it. And God just opened doors like that. They said there were about 40 million homes that Acts Network and all went in here in the States, and it was just a really great experience for me.
Well, was most of the viewing audience under Acts in Alabama, or most
outside
the state of Alabama?
Very few. Well, you had, but most of them were all over the country, because the Acts Network was everywhere there's a Southern Baptist. And sometimes, let me tell you, it's just really interesting. I know we were, I won't call a city, but a rather large city, and I was
the country.
right. And this, so they called the Acts station and said, look, we want to get our church on TV, and you got that Methodist, take him off. So they did one Sunday, and they said they'd never received as many letters saying, we want to put the Methodist back on. So it was a very, very interesting concept. And then, Steve's, the guy, we did it totally with volunteers. Volunteers did everything. And so one of the guys said, we need to get our own local low-power station. I said, what in the world is that? They said, well, if you can get a license, it takes about 6 or 7 years to get a license out of Washington. And if you do, you can go on the cable on some remote channel and be local. So I said, sure, go for it. We got 7 years. About 3 months later, he called me and he said, we got our license, we're ready to go. I said, I thought you said 7 years. We did it in 3 months. We were able to get on the cables here in Montgomery. Now, they put us on channel 13. Now that was the ideal channel, because WSFA was 12, ESPN was 14. So they had to go through 13 either way you went. And so, and our reception was as good as ESPN or NBC or anything else. So we had a large, but we were able to, locally, it was our station. We could control what we had on it. And it became an outreach to the community in a lot of ways, and we did a lot of public service kind of things, and we carried some of the worship services in the city. But we had our own local TV, and still have it today. It's still Fraser, WREZ, Fraser Christian Television.
Well, now, but with the Acts thing, how many years would Acts run you nationwide like that?
I you know, thank you for asking me a memory question at my age. I mean, that's
ballpark.
That's a real compliment.
About 20 years?
I'd say we were on it for 10 or 12 or 15. I really don't know. Maybe 20 years.
But here locally, you were on probably 25, 30 years?
Always been on, yes, since about 80-something, and still on today on WSFA. The worship service is on at 9:30. Technically, we had 6 worship services every Sunday morning. We had 3 contemporary and 3 traditional services. And the traditional service was always the one that was televised locally, and then on the Acts
That was at
Network.
11 in the morning.
Yeah, but they did the 9:30 service.
9:30, okay.
And so we stuck with that. 9:30 became the most optimum time, we discovered.
They could see you didn't go to the other churches they wanted to.
Well, and some people say, you know, I'm late to Sunday school because I like to watch you all and see if you end up on time. You know, a lot of churches don't end on time. But it was a great experience.
Now, what year did you go to begin at Fraser?
1972.
And what year did you retire? You retired at Fraser, didn't you?
Right, but see, we have mandatory retirement
in the Methodist,
Church. So at age 70, I had to retire.
Oh, you had that. It's like the judges in Alabama.
I was like
our,
the judge,
our judges
like
in
the
Alabama
judges
had to retire.
had mandatory. I didn't have any choice.
All
about
over
it.
the country, all Methodist ministers.
All Methodist ministers. So
Does it still exist? That still law still exists?
well, they became after I retired, they moved it up to 72. So now it's still 72.
Yeah.
So I had to retire in 2008.
So 72 to 2008 for 34 years.
36 years.
36 years, yeah.
Now I got to teach you math.
That's right, you sure do.
No, I don't know.
Well, I should have known.
No, I just
08
remember, I know 36.
36 years.
Yeah.
How many sermons do you think you preached? Have you preached more than one a day?
Now, did you say good sermons or sermons?
Just regular sermons.
Well,
all of them are good.
I preached one of the things that they said about television. They said, look, television is important if people can identify with the person there, and said, if you're going to plan to be gone a lot, it ain't going to work. So I was seldomly ever out on Sunday morning. I could be out Monday through Thursday or something like that, but so every Sunday for...
You never took many Sundays off.
I would
vacation or anything?
No, for vacation we could leave Sunday afternoon, come back Saturday night, or something like that. So I was, for the whole time we were there, I would say probably for 40, 35 years, every day on television.
Wow. Now, you know, but you were, even though you retired in mandatory retirement at 70 or 72, you have stayed so active civically. I mean, everybody in Montgomery knows you from a civic aspect. But back to the TV thing, how big was your congregation at Fraser?
Well, when I came there, we had about, first Sunday I was there, we had almost 100 folks.
That's all.
And
was it that same location, Atlanta Highway?
Same location. It had just relocated out there. And we had a great music program. Music, you can't do television if you don't have good music.
Right.
And we had great music, and that was one of the things that was attractive to the TV. And so
I'm sure you didn't hurt much.
Well, they a lot of people would click off. I tell you, true story. That Steve, first Sunday I was at Fraser, I was sitting up there and they tape recorded the service, but they did it. You remember those little tape recorders, and you mash the button and it starts. Yeah. Well, the guy on the front row was taping the service, and after this marvelous music, when I got up to preach, I heard it go click. They were cutting it off because they were recording the music. They didn't care about the sermon there.
But now let me ask you this: you before that, one question real quick. Where was that? What was it for the Fraser? Was it named after some legendary minister or something, or somebody who was a benefactor or something?
Well, no.
How did it have that name?
We're still looking for the benefactor. That hasn't come yet. But the Clayton Street, right up the street here. Clayton Street, you had Methodist, Clayton Street Methodist, Clayton Street Baptist. Clayton Street Baptist decided to change their name to Heritage. And you know, we Methodists try to keep up with the Baptists. And back then, as before I came, they said, well, you know, we need to change our name. So they changed it, and they talked about a lot of different names. And they came up with the name Fraser, which had been a minister in the conference somewhere, but didn't have any big connection, but that's what they named it. To him. And then the Baptist, Clayton Street Baptist, which became Heritage Baptist, moved out to Perry Hill Road. So the Methodists, we try to follow the Baptists, so that's when they moved out to the Atlanta Highway.
Now, before that, though, I want to get into your early years because your family has a rich, unbelievable tradition. Your father was a legendary Methodist minister, and you have a brother, George.
That's right.
Who has been a legendary Methodist minister. Y'all have made an imprint on the Methodist religion for the last 100 years in Alabama. I mean, the Mathison family has been associated with the Methodist Church. Now, tell me about your father, because I had people, when I would write things about you, they would comment about your father was legendary. He was he was a Methodist minister.
Right, but he didn't, not, the year I was born, he worked with the State Highway Department of Florida. He helped build the road from Fort Walton Beach out to Destin. He helped build that road, and there wasn't any bridge.
Was he from down there?
Yeah, but he was from there in Pensacola, Crestview, down in there. So when I was born, he had made a decision to go into ministry. So that was 85 years ago. That's how old I am.
So before you were born, had he changed from being a Department of Transportation person to a
right
minister?
at that time. I
About the
can't say
same
if it was
time.
right before, maybe the year before I was born. And
Now,
my
your
dad-
brother George is older than you, though, isn't he?
No, well, everybody thinks he is, but he's not. But he's younger, 5
Not
years.
5
younger.
is 5 years
5
difference.
years. 5 years.
So,
younger.
but you were the first child.
First child.
With just 2 sons.
Mama said that was enough.
So two boys, and both of them became legendary Methodist ministers. But your daddy, the district for the Methodists is the Panhandle of Florida and Alabama.
Right. It's
So in the
Alabama, West
same-
Florida. Right.
Alabama, West Florida. Gil Costy ought to have been involved with that.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
one of my best friends and my fraternity brothers is Mike Watson.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Oh,
Mike and
yeah.
I were in college together.
Oh, is that,
Alabama.
yeah, Alabama, yeah,
We
and
were
he
fraternity
became
brothers.
when he made it big. He became a bishop.
Bishop, yeah.
He really, and he's a good friend. Was a good leader.
Carl Stiegel, I talk about, and I actually texted Mike this weekend about something. I actually told him to tell Margaret Happy Mother's Day.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, back to your daddy. Back then, they would move Methodist ministers around a lot, unless you became legendary like you and George. That y'all could stay at y'all's churches, but otherwise they'd move you around, Methodist ministers, every 4 or 5 years.
Well, the reason they move you around, somebody's got to want you. If nobody wants you, you just stay there. So I stayed 36 years at Fraser. My brother was 26 years in Auburn.
They love him over
And
there.
my dad never did move a lot. Now, very interesting. See, when he went into ministry, he didn't have any education. And he started to Palmer Junior College. In the first quarter he started, they closed. And then he went to Bob Jones.
Is this after he left the Department of Transportation?
Right,
and became
that's
minister?
when I was about a year old. And Palmer closed, and then went to Bob Jones, and they closed.
What was his first name?
His had
a nickname, didn't he?
Yeah, his name was Cy. That's his.
That's
That's his nickname.
Oh, his nickname was Si.
Yeah.
They don't know his real name.
Nobody
It's
knew
Si,
that.
S-I.
S.I.
Uh-huh.
And my son and grandson are both
Named after
Cy,
him,
yeah.
okay.
But his name was Marion Clyde. But if you went to Panama City and asked people what his name was, you wouldn't find 1% of the people.
Is that where his church was in Panama City?
He was there the longest
Uh-huh.
period of time, and he retired there.
But he came up here and
Oh yeah, oh
Didn't
yeah.
he
Well,
start- did he come to Auburn or
well,
something?
see, after those two schools closed, they sent him to Notasulga.
Uh-huh.
So he enrolled at Auburn. He didn't figure he'd close Auburn,
so that's why he came to Auburn as
What?
the Methodist minister.
right?
there?
Well, and so, but then he didn't finish, and then they moved him to Wetumpka, and he went to Huntington. Now, Steve, I was in the 4th grade and went to my daddy's college graduation at Huntington College.
In the 4th grade.
In the 4th grade.
You remember it?
Oh yeah, I remember going down and seeing my dad.
He was already a
graduate.
legendary preacher, though, wasn't
Yeah,
he?
well, he was doing good, and then he went to Opelika and stayed 12
It was
years.
Opelika, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
and
right.
that's where.
That's where George
I
is. George is Auburn.
Yeah,
wasn't it?
George is at Auburn, but Opelika was sort of home. I went there in the 7th grade and stayed through seminary.
So you
it's a-
finished high school over there in Opelika.
Opelika.
Uh-huh. But you went straight to Huntington, and you were a superstar basketball and tennis player. at
Well,
Huntington. Did you know early on you were going to be a Methodist minister?
Well, when I started to college, when I was in
Huntington.
high school, I accepted the call to ministry. Actually, I went to a junior college. I had a scholarship to play basketball at Alabama, and then the coach said,
Out of Opelika High School.
"Yeah," he said, "I want you here," but said,
You were guard.
"But I need to tell you," he said, "I'm leaving." I said, "Ooh." But he said, "Let me tell you, there's a great basketball school called Young Harris up in North Georgia, and you need to go up there." And I didn't know it was a good Methodist school.
Young Harris was a Methodist school.
Oh, yeah, so I
sorry.
went there for 2 years. He said it's the best junior college basketball in the country. So I went up there and for 2 years played.
Guard.
And then, oh, yeah, everybody was taller than I was. And then I came to Huntington for 2 years and played basketball and tennis there.
Now, there was a legendary basketball coach that was at Huntington for a long time. What was his name?
Neil Posey.
That's what Neil Posey. Did you play under him?
Well, he's the reason I came to Huntington. And the way it was, when I was in the 10th grade in high school, Opelika for the first time ever went to the state tournament because they won a couple of games in the district. And I was a 10th grade and was pushed up to the varsity. Our opening round was against Lanier, who was undefeated. That was Coach Posey's
Y'all
team.
had to play Lanier.
First game. And, we wouldn't have one chance. Steve, we upset Lanier and beat them. And Coach Posey told me, he said, boy, when you get out of school, wherever I'm coaching, I want you to come play. So he was at Huntington, started, so I played on the first basketball team at Huntington, Coach Posey.
Do you remember that era when Lee and Lanier just dominated high school athletes in the state?
Yeah.
I mean, those Birmingham schools would come down here and Lee and Lanier beat them 40-0.
That's right.
And Lee and Lanier would win the state in everything.
No, they were a powerhouse.
I mean, they would win track, basketball, football, and that Lee Lanier game out there at Crampton Bowl was like, it was a bigger rivalry than Alabama Auburn. I mean, they'd pack Crampton Bowl like you ain't never
you had
seen.
to get a ticket a year early.
Exactly. You remember all that era?
Oh, yeah. Now, let me just tell you a little interesting fact. In high school, I didn't play football because I made All-State in basketball as a sophomore. And boy, was I glad.
At Opelika.
Yeah, I was chicken, but didn't want anybody to know it. And so going into my senior year, the coach said, would you consider come on and playing quarterback? I said, ooh, Coach. He said, I know you don't like to get hit. Said, we'll put one of those colored jerseys on you. I said, can I wear it in the game too? But Steve, let me tell you, they say I was the quickest quarterback they ever had because I'd get it.
So you actually started in football?
Oh yeah, I started. And let me tell you this, I quarterbacked the first football team to ever beat Robert E. Lee.
That was Opelika, you quarterbacked the team to beat Lee?
Yeah, the first year they ever had a team, they were undefeated, just ramsacking everybody. Again, we wouldn't have had one in a 100 or 1,000 chance, but that night we beat Robert E. Lee and the coach there, Jones, it went on.
Bob Jones,
such a great coach.
Tom Jones.
Tom Jones, he said of all his football career, that was the worst defeat he ever had was when Opelika, with a jackleg quarterback that never had played before,
he called you a jackleg
upset his team. That's the only game they lost. But that was a great, and that was Montgomery.
So your daddy, Cy Mathison, he preached at Panama City for 25 years or so?
Yeah, after Opelika, he went down there, preached at First Methodist Church, and after, I can't remember, maybe 10 or 12 years. Now, see, I never lived down there. I was already out of seminary, but he preached there, and then there was, when he retired.
You went to Emory Seminary?
Right. And then I went
to
George
Princeton. Go to Emory too?
Yeah, he did. And, but then,
Princeton too.
And then I went to Princeton and did another degree. But my dad, he stayed there and loved. He wouldn't leave Panama City.
I wrote a column about you and George 10 years ago or something like that, and I bet you I had so many letters from around the state. I didn't know your heritage, but I knew Cy Mathison. I said the two great brothers who were legendary Methodist ministers. Do you remember me writing that column?
I remember that.
It was 10 years ago, and I talked about you and George.
Oh, I thought my mama wrote it for you and put your name on it. That must have been it.
But I had never heard of Cy Mathison because he was a lot older, but a different generation. But I got the most letters about how much they loved your daddy. Now he came to Lee County after Panama City. Afterwards.
Yeah, afterwards. Yeah.
Okay.
And he retired in Panama City.
Okay.
And
so he spent 25 years down there.
And they called him the Pope of the Panhandle. He just was a pastor to everybody, regardless of denomination. He was a chaplain at the hospital. He was just sort of the resident Pope of the Panhandle, and had a great reputation.
Well, you do too. Now you grew up in Opelika, and then went off to that junior college, then went to Huntington and played star in basketball. Yeah. When did you take up tennis? Like you were a star tennis player too.
I started playing when I was a senior in high school. Parks and Recreation fellow started, so I played in college at Young Harris and at Huntington, and then always played since then.
Now, back to your career though, your education, went to Huntington, basketball and tennis star there. Then you went to graduate school at Emory and then Princeton. When did you come, what was your first pastorate?
Well, my first pastorate, my first one was part-time. I was a senior in college, and Woodland Methodist Church down here in Pike Road Methodist, they had nobody to send it there. And and the bishop asked me, he said, hey, I'd like for you to go down there. I said, president of the student body and playing basketball. I can't. He said, listen, they don't want much. And that's what we sending them. Not much. And so I went to actually.
Was this your senior year at Huntington?
My senior year at Huntington. So I served. And then after Princeton, I was an associate pastor at Capitol Heights Methodist here. So most of my ministry has
been here in Montgomery?
Been in the Montgomery area.
You've been here from what years would you finish Huntington, do you think?
Well, I finished in 60, so I've been all but about 6 years here in Montgomery.
Yeah, you sure have. Well, you've seen a lot of politics over that time too.
Oh yeah, and there's some great politicians. And you do the best job. You know, the best thing about an election is when they have you on there and you tell why something happened and how it happened and what's going to happen. And I always enjoy watching your political analysis.
You know, thank you for saying that. One thing that I have always observed over the years is Methodist ministers' sons have excelled in Alabama politics. The one that comes to mind mostly, you know, Jeff Sessions was a great Methodist layperson, went to Huntington like you.
Sure.
But Howell Heffen's daddy was a Methodist minister.
Right.
He used to always brag about that and talk about it. And he was a little bit embarrassed because as Methodist ministers are wanting to do, they would move you around. So his daddy had been moved from Tuscumbia over to Georgia and was pastoring a church when Howell Heffen was born. And on his birth certificate it has born in Georgia, you know, obviously. So he was Alabama's senator and judge, and he was really embarrassed about that Georgia birth certificate. He'd say, somebody would comment about, where were you born, Judge? Well, I bet it was over there in Georgia. My daddy was doing missionary work among the heathen over there.
I like that.
He used to always say that.
He was a great man.
But that's been my observation over the years is Methodist ministers' sons have been a lot of governors. I tell you, our time goes by, John. It's gone. Our time's up.
Oh, thank you, Faye. This is one of the biggest honors I've had to be on a TV set with you. Thank you so much.
You're the biggest honor I've had. Let's do it again sometime because we just touched the surface, I think.
I would love to.
Folks, our guest tonight's been legendary Methodist minister John Ed Mathison. We're going to have him back on again so we can talk some more about Alabama and Montgomery ministry and maybe talk about some politics. We thank you all for watching. Hope you tune in again next week for Alabama Politics. Thank you, John Ed.
Thank you.
Goes by in a hurry.